All right, so I'm here with Matt from Nervos Network. Um, he's been in the crypto space for quite a long time. As relative to most people's entries, you'd consider him kind of ancient when it when it comes to this stuff. But I'll just put it in question for him. When did you get into Bitcoin, and what drew you to it?
I would say probably like 2015, 2016 started like seriously getting into crypto stuff. But reading up and like thinking before that. So like I guess like my pathway to crypto was thinking about money and the way the internet worked. And I guess like in the wake of like I guess like 2013, like Satoshi Dice, like people figuring out that like maybe Bitcoin wasn't going to work for micropayments. That's kind of like where I came in of like people starting to ask this question of like, it seems like there's something really cool here, and like Satoshi had great ideas, but like we don't know how to accomplish it. And like, then Lightning came along, and I got pulled into the Ethereum community for a little while, and then yeah, I don't know. Feel free to go there and go from there.
Um, yeah, you said Lightning came along, but what happened to Lightning? Why didn't it help like fulfill the what Bitcoin was supposed to be used for?
It seems like there's Lightning is just like thorny. I mean, part of it is just you're dealing with like a pretty constrained system with Bitcoin, and even though Satoshi talks about you could do channels, like it was never designed to do that, and then it just kind of been like just hacky to make it work, and it does work really well. I think for what it accomplishes, like all things considered. But the unfortunate thing is that it doesn't really scale too much like user to user. It's more like a business to business kind of system where it's pretty solid today, in that regard. But I think the vision is like users have their coins like under their control, and they can use them anywhere. But you get into some UX issues, and then scaling issues with I guess actually just routing money around in the construction. So it's like a great start, but we're I don't know, we're coming up on like a decade into like people proposing this idea and working on it, and like it's still like there's still people that say like this thing we need to just give up on this. Yeah, so it's a real open question of like is Bitcoin able to support this, or is another something else going to be needed?
Okay, and at the time of the block size reward, which side did you decide to stand on, if any? And were you in favor of going past the 1 MB block size at all, or did you want it to stay fixed?
I think at the time I was relatively new in this journey, so I was a little indifferent to like that idea of like if it's one block or two blocks. But there was like the sense of like people are taking over Bitcoin was very palpable. So like that like definitely like straying away from like the mining pools and exchanges kind of dictating like the roadmap for where Bitcoin would go. But over time, like just watching these things and seeing how they play out, definitely on the small block side of things. I compare like are you going to build bigger highways, or are you going to try to build flying cars? And that's kind of like how I craft the mental model. And like maybe we find out that flying cars are impractical, but at least we tried that, and then we just make the best use out of the highway system. And like if we need to do 32 meg blocks, something like that, then like fine. But at least we tried like the thing that architecturally would seem to be the best route, but we still don't know if it's actually going to work.
Right. And the the argument against making the highways just bigger is that it's a compromise on decentralization. And
Kind of. I mean, oh, go ahead. I don't
no,
want
no,
to cut you off.
no.
I think that's one way to look at it. I mean, any requirements that you increase on the node, like you are going to reduce the number of people that can use it. But I think there's a bigger question of if you actually can make the blocks big enough to make a system that's usable for everyone. I think a lot of times people think about like we need to replicate the throughput of Visa, or you know each user needs to do 2 transactions a day, something like that. But I think, it's much more wacky. Like you could have, in the future, users want to do 100,000 transactions a day to, make small payments inside of games. And, Vitalik had this idea that like people would get paid for every minute they work, and like then, like you
Oh
could pay
yeah.
automated cars. Like the future could get so wacky. And like I really just push back against that idea. Like you could just look at LA. Like there are limits to like if you're making this highway bigger, if you actually fix the congestion. So I try to push back in that respect.
Yeah, that's good because I'd say my view on the future, and it's hard to predict, but when it comes to trying to have the whole world using this and
Yeah.
using micropayments, um I'd get even more radical than what Vitalik is saying. Like
Hmm.
I would talk about like, you know, paying people for per 1 second of work or something like that. Like,
Yeah, no, you could. I mean, the sky's the limit, right?
yeah, it just gets makes it more and more granular, and
Hmm.
we have no idea how granular things are gonna get.
And the crazy thing is, like when you just have a public system and it's just there for people to do whatever, like you can't stop people from paying people by the second. It's just like whatever the market will bear.
Yeah.
And it just feels like you're working against that if you just keep saying we're going to keep making the blocks bigger. And yeah, like watching Solana, I think really it's like you have some people like cheering like how many transactions the system's doing, then you have some people trying to keep the thing running, then you have other people like getting ready to like jam more transactions through the system. And it's just really like like you find a balance, but you're always kind of fighting this momentum that's pushing the system to its limits.
Yeah, it seems like if you say just every 4 years increase the block size by 2x, that just makes transactions um cheaper per transaction, obviously, and then people end up doing more transactions to ultimately fill
Exactly.
the blocks again, and then you're just right where you left off or started from. So so
Yeah.
it's a question of have you even like solved anything really?
Yeah, and then it's almost like in smart contract systems, like most chains don't really talk about the idea of how do you pay for security. I guess you have EIP 1559 in the Ethereum community, which seems to work pretty well. But the flip side of that is like you need measurable or significant transaction fees to fund your security, unless you're going to just do issuance into infinity. So like the bigger the blocks are, the more kind of downward pressure you have on those fees. Um, so I think that's like there is this equilibrium. Somebody should formalize it at some point of like the blocks to transaction fees to security kind of equilibrium. But in my mind, it's a very just simple system, and everyone's just trying to navigate it the best they can.
Yeah, for sure. And that I'll leap into Nervos from this. I was gonna
Hmm.
cover Ethereum, but since it's relevant, Nervos, as we know, basically decided to scale by pushing computation off the main chain.
Yeah.
Um, how would you explain that to people who are noobs?
Ah, man, it's tough. Like I think that the ordinals are helping a lot, where it's like people are seeing like, oh, people are just putting like these JPEGs into Bitcoin, and like that, you can still transfer currency around, but like these JPEGs are in there, and like Bitcoin doesn't really know about the JPEGs, but it doesn't really care either. So I'd probably start there and say like, okay, now imagine that instead of JPEGs, you just put executable code that you could, use in the chain if you wanted to or not. Like you kind of have that option to construct it how you want, but overall, the chain doesn't really care what's in there or if people want to use what's being put there to actually do smart contract stuff. But you're not so kind of fixed into like in Ethereum, everything is going through kind of like this world computer. And like that's the way it's set up. On CKB, it's much more flexible, where it's like you just have this data that's in there, and if you wanted to use it to do contract stuff, you could. Yeah, but the main chain itself is it's just going to keep clicking along. Like it doesn't really care about the semantics of what's in that data.
Yeah, so the people who are publishing ordinals on Bitcoin, they're paying a one-time fee for that, right?
Yeah.
So is the community kind of like worried? Like, do we have to purge these ordinals from the chain to save the state size? As we
So as far as the state goes, they can purge most of the data. So like you're still going to have a UTXO that's created for that ordinal, but the actual like image data, like you can just prune that out of the node. I mean, I guess people have strong feelings about pruning or not, but to be a full node on the network, you don't actually need the JPEG information. It does bloat the history. So yeah, I think you have different camps, or it's like some people are pissed off, other people are happy that, Bitcoin finally has a security budget. I think that was the question that nobody really wanted to address for, so many years, that like, how are we going to secure Bitcoin after the block subsidy declines to a certain amount? And yeah, with ordinals, and now with roll-ups and other things people are talking about doing on Bitcoin, like it seems like Bitcoin will have a security budget. So it doesn't seem like the ordinals are going anywhere. They might get priced out at some point. I think there's been something like 60 million ordinals that have been created. And it's similar to the Ethereum NFTs. At some point, you just have so many, and people just don't even care anymore because they're not special. So I think ultimately that's how it gets resolved. Is people, for the most part, lose interest in this, but it's still useful for some things. Those Bored Apes, those punks, they're still valuable on Ethereum. So it'll be a similar thing.
Yeah, and the security budget problem, or this, I don't know what to call it, like dilemma or whatever,
Hmm.
where you run if the block subsidy goes to zero eventually, and over a century from now, but if
Hmm.
it goes to zero, you basically have to rely on having a sufficient amount of transactions in
Yep.
each block to cover the security so that the attacks aren't profitable. And it seems like instead of coming up with a solution like a tail emission, Bitcoin basically had this um, emergent solution from
Hmm.
the free market. People just
Yep.
stuffing whatever they wanted on it,
Yep.
and that's what made it sufficient. So it seems like for now, that problem has been more or less solved because of stuff like ordinals, which
Yeah,
is really good for the pro Bitcoin camp, because
definitely.
um, anyone that was talking about, increasing the supply past 21 million or something like that, they sort of lost it's
Yeah,
that point, the argument sort of like lost its credibility because of this.
100%. Yeah.
So yeah, it's interesting because everyone thought, for a while there, I think most people that were taking the security budget problem very seriously thought Bitcoin was like more or less screwed in the future.
Yeah, it wasn't clear like how far out you had to go, or like what the contingency plan was going to be then, but it was like it's like something has to happen,
Yeah,
And
yeah.
yeah.
And we had like like 140 years to figure it out, and it seems to have solved itself in 15 years. So that's interesting.
The So it gets a little more nuanced in that you need incentive to progress the chain. So like if you say like if you're relying on transaction fees, and like that is like the block reward itself is not that big. But the percentage of transaction fees to block reward in terms of like paying the miner gets, out of whack. Like you could have a point where it's like there's a block mined, it takes up all the transactions, it's paying all these fees, and then there's no transactions, or there's a small amount of transactions in the mempool after that, and it's actually incentive compatible for somebody to go back and just keep remining the previous block. And like that, I think that would be the problem that shows up, sooner rather than later. But it's not just the block reward going to zero. It's, Nakamoto consensus is very much about progressing the chain. So yeah, that's the.
Interesting. So On that note, I do want to jump into Nervos since we're
Yeah.
talking security already. W- what makes Nervos different, I guess, from Bitcoin and Ethereum in terms of security?
In terms of security, yeah, that's so like Bitcoin, it's secured by proof of work, so that's a distinction compared to Ethereum. Some
Mhm.
people think proof of stake is more secure than proof of work. You know, that's a conversation in of itself.
Yeah.
Um, compared to Bitcoin, it's much smaller, you know, in terms of like hash rate, number of miners, distribution, all of that. So, you know, Bitcoin definitely reigns king there.
Yeah.
Um, that you have smart contract security as well of, you know, with CKB VM, which is the virtual machine of, you know, I guess the Nervos network or CKB, the layer one blockchain. It's much more closer to Bitcoin in the way it operates. So you don't have the same, um, I guess, just wackiness that can happen between contracts. It's much easier to reason about like this script can do this, and when it's done, this is what you can expect. And if those aren't the results that you get, then it's a invalid transaction versus Ethereum, which you kind of just throw something in there, something comes out, and you really don't have any control over what happens once it's in the network and kind of like banging around inside that virtual machine. Um, yeah, I think you know security with these things gets into it really gets into nuanced territory. So if there is anywhere you want to take the conversation from there, feel
Yeah.
free.
Yeah. There's definitely lots of layers to the concept of security and blockchain, especially.
Yeah.
But I guess the one I wanted to talk about was the like tokenomics and block
Mm,
subsidy.
like longevity of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so the issuance schedule of CKB is fixed. Like Bitcoin, it's not something that you can expect like core devs and you know some other parties to just be messing with over time. With proof of stake, there is kind of this outstanding question of like what is the appropriate yield that you need to secure the network because that capital could go into DeFi things or now you have restaking, which is really you know changing things a lot. But you know we need a couple years to see where that ultimately goes. Um, but the security of CKB is based on the different components of the tokenomics. So you have a utility in CKB, which is that the coin is actually used to store data on the chain, and that man, help me out with a question. I feel like I'm getting you know deep in my thoughts.
No, you're good. I get it, but it's like compared to Ethereum, where they are struggling with the state rent problem, uh,
Yeah,
and Nervos basically did a two-in-one where they solved the state explosion problem while also sort of solving the like security budget problem because the locking up the CKB tokens it puts well, the requirement of locking up the CKB tokens puts an effective throttle on how big the blockchain state can be, and at the
yeah,
same time it takes tokens or coins, sorry, out of circulation, and that one-to-one requirement of one CKB per byte of data stored uh, basically puts this pressure of demand for the network going up and circulating supply going down.
yeah.
So it gives the token value and utility that makes it so that the block reward is actually sufficient to secure the chain.
Yeah, so we're talking about that, I guess, transaction demand on Bitcoin, you know, dictating what your security budget is. It's basically how much people are willing to pay to do transactions. And then on CKB, I guess the equivalent is how much are people willing to pay to store data on the chain. I guess, you have the supply of CKB that's out there that could be used, and then the demand for that. And then I guess Ethereum, it's more like I guess demand for Ether as some sort of collateral. That seems to be the sink there. It's like, do you want to deposit it in DeFi? Do you want to stake it? There is ETH being created, I guess, at every block. I guess you get a bit of transaction demand too there because people are burning part of their fees to use the network. Yeah, credit to the Ethereum community. I mean, I think I have immense respect for the amount of iteration that they do. It's just, I just have big questions when it comes to like a decentralized shared network for the world, if that's the best way to go. But no, I mean, they definitely lead the industry in terms of like crazy new ideas that for the most part work pretty well, surprisingly.
Yeah. Um, I think it's like talking about the uh security and value capture between Nervos and Ethereum was always one of the tougher things to wrap my head around. Even when I had the chance to reread the Nervos white paper,
Hmm.
because they talk about it. They talk about how I don't think I'm going to get this right because it's been
Hmm.
so long since I've read it, but they talk about how the um you know what, I'm not going to remember it, but it had some yeah,
You don't have a relationship between the assets that are stored on chain. Like what is the value of those assets? Like you could create like $1
right.
trillion in Tether on top of Ethereum, and that has nothing to do with the ETH coin itself. And yeah, the idea with CKB was to tie in some way you're tying that native asset to something that's happening on chain, and that ends up being the demand to store data there. And yeah, I mean, we'll see how that works out. I mean, I think it's really, I don't know of another chain in the industry that kind of has this utility or that connection between like driving a security budget and something happening on chain. I think most people kind of look at it too one-dimensionally as well. Like they just look at like the demand to store data on chain. They're just like, okay, there's 50 billion CKB, and there's this however many hundreds of megabytes of data stored on chain. It's like therefore there's a lot of slack in the system. But I look at it a little more broadly because you also have the Nervos DAO, where if you have long-term holders, like they can lock in the DAO, and then that reduces circulating supply. So there's more dimensionality to it. Yeah.
Yeah, but like you said, it's like uh there's really nothing else like Nervos's model out in the industry. Like I still haven't I found other chains, and you shared some of them with me, or one of them with me, that have tried the um the risk V model. I mean, sorry, the risk
Hmm.
5 model.
Yeah.
Um, but no one's pointed out to me a chain that does the I've seen state rent models, but I haven't
Yeah.
seen ones that lock a like fixed requirement. I've seen other ones where they're like, all right, um yeah, it's like a ten like you have to store like some tokens for some amount of state, but the state's not like specific to the number of tokens.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Solana does rent in some way like this. I think UTXOs have something to do with it because if you have accounts, then some of your state is going to get kind of like shared together for certain users, and then who pays that rent or who locks up those coins to do that. Yeah, I think you have to have UTXOs to do this right. But I also see like some like there are challenges that come with it. Like I remember in 2021, like during the NFT boom, there were people that wanted to deploy like 10,000 NFTs on CKB, and they're like, okay, well, I need to lock up 400 CKB per NFT. Like, do my users want to purchase those assets? Like this is it's friction, but ultimately that facilitated creation of a new NFT standard, which it's called Coda in our side, and then compressed NFTs in Solana is like similar solution. But as a result, we don't have a huge number like, forgettable NFTs that are stored like other chains. And yeah, I think it's a long-term thing, and it definitely in the short term is challenging, and to get through it.
Yeah, I always thought that was interesting. Right when the NFT boom came around, Nervos basically went the route of creating a new standard since it was so expensive to get whole NFTs stored on the main chain. And it kind of goes to show that the token model essentially works in terms of making sure that the layer one isn't abused and is only
Yeah,
storing things that are actually worth storing on it. Um,
yeah.
and it basically lets it forces people to innovate for solutions that are more lightweight. And that puts Nervos ahead of the competition because now they have more lightweight solutions than everyone else.
Yeah, I think even for like more, I guess the kind of applications that wouldn't really consider these kind of things, like there was a meme coin minting, I think 2 weeks ago, and like during that mint, the size of the state went up like 20 megabytes, and then when the mint was over, and I guess everyone kind of consolidated down their state, it went back down to where it was prior. And you could think about like a meme coin mint on another chain where maybe like the meme coin developer like doesn't really care about this kind of thing. Like on Ethereum, you used to be able to, delete your state and you get a gas refund, but it didn't really have much adoption because, who wants to do extra work? But like in this case, users want the ability to get their state back. So it does create a great system. Of course, like with CKB, in all these things, there are some additional demands placed on developers compared to other chains, but it seems like over time a lot of these things make sense, and on a
Mhm.
long enough timeline, people will go through the little bit extra work.
Yeah. And it just seems like the economic model for CKB was so it was so well thought out because of that, because people were pushed um off of the main pushing most of the computation and data off the main chain. And that's what their goal was. It was to move on to layer two for scalability, and the coin literally incentivizes that to happen. It's not just some off-chain goal that devs are agreeing on trying to do. Like
Yeah.
in Bitcoin's case, there's actually strong economic incentives to push computation off chain.
Yeah. So sometimes I wonder if there may come a day where the Bitcoin state is bigger than CKB. It's grown, I think, 5 gigabytes in the last year, and there is no incentive to keep it small. There was some inscriptions protocol that was actually using the UTXOs to store the inscription data so people couldn't prune it. And you see in that I think eventually they'll address that somehow so people can't do that. But there is no like in protocol way to control the state of Bitcoin versus on CKB, there is.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just like that was one of the things that was brilliant to me because they had a goal of moving on to layer two, and they didn't just have a cabal of devs like working on how to get that done and how to make layer two attractive enough in the short term to make that happen. There was literally an economic throttle that would push stuff onto layer two as it became too expensive. And I think that's what drew me to it.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that thing about end users being able to run nodes like really is underappreciated. And I think we're gonna have to go through this whole period of the big smart contract chains and even Ethereum, like the lightest of all of these chains, like whatever we see eventually that pushes users to want to run nodes, whether that's censorship or I guess just being able to connect directly to other people in the network. Um, this idea came from Bitcoin, and like this idea that users need to run nodes, and that's the reason that the state is constrained. Because if I tell you, you only need to store say max 50 gigs of data on your laptop and you can run a node, that's different from I don't know in 10 years how much data you have to store to be a node. And yeah, maybe it makes sense to go into, I guess, how full nodes work. I don't know.
Yeah, we can
You have
go
to
in.
like give me like
Yeah,
a place to start, because like I feel like people don't really think about these things.
yeah, we can get into the nodes, but you said you don't really know how big the state will be at a certain given time. And it's like
Yeah,
that's true for CKB too, but it's depending on how much of the available supply people are using up. Because
yeah.
if
You
it's,
know a max.
yeah, you know a max state size, it's like essentially deterministic. Like you could
Yeah.
calculate what the max is 50 years from now.
Hmm.
And that's valuable data when trying to understand what a node should be and
Yeah.
how big they should be. But
Yeah, it may be even smaller, like 20% of the supply now is in the DAO. And it's like how much of that, will move out. Maybe it's some percentage
yeah,
of whatever the max is over time.
yeah, yeah, it'll have to be some like it'll have to do with something like the yield from the DAO, and how strong of an incentive that is to use versus using it for on-chain storage.
Yeah,
And there's got to be some equilibrium there at some point.
definitely. Yeah,
Uh,
and then you have the rate at which new coins are being minted. So like later in the issuance schedule, there'll be less, but like now that there's lots of fresh supply coming out every day.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so let's talk about full nodes for a little bit. Like, why is it important to be a full node? We can start there.
Yeah. So I think one thing that really puts the wind at this project's back, and CKB in general, is just doing things that Bitcoin did, and not even really like not even employing that much analysis to really say like what are the reasons why, like I think a lot of these things are emergent, where like over time, like we're seeing like why Bitcoin works as well as it does. And I think with CKB, it was more of like simple principles of like do the things that work, not the like convoluted way where we're gonna have to invent a bunch of new things, and then we're gonna have some new problems. We're gonna patch those problems. Like just a completely different mindset of just start with things that we know work well. And getting into full nodes in Bitcoin. So an important thing to consider with the role of full nodes in Bitcoin is the role of miners as well. So a full node is going to validate all the blocks that make sure they conform to the consensus rules, and also connect to other nodes and propagate those blocks around, right? So when a miner is mining a block, if the block that they're mining doesn't conform to the consensus rules of the full node, then they're just burning energy, and they're going to get no reward as a result. So you get kind of this balance of power here, where it's like miners are chasing economic gain, but to do so they need to take on costs, and whether they get gain for the costs that are put out is kind of at the mercy of the network of nodes. Like you have that ability for the like citizens of the network to have a vote in that, of like if it gets into like very like rough social consensus there, like UASF in 2017, this was like ultimately what broke SegWit 2x, and the block battle was like you had a lot of passionate users that said, at this block height, if you're not supporting SegWit, we're going to reject your blocks. And then miners have to look at that and say, what side of this are we going to be on? Like, are we going to take the risk that we're mining, for no reason? All this breaks down if once you go to proof of stake and you don't have that operational cost to produce blocks, then it becomes purely a political system of just what this is the meme of social consensus in Ethereum, which, as I guess it gets into a whole nother topic itself. But yeah.
Yeah. Um, so let me just roll back here. So
Yeah, yeah, go for it.
the separation of power between, I can get that. I totally get that because I've identified that as a strength of proof of work in the past, where um the the deciding or finding a valid block is about expending energy, and it's something that is external to the network
Yeah.
itself. Uh, and then the nodes are people who can, or the people who validate blocks, like you said. So in the case of um, like network upgrades and stuff, it's about what it's not like the miners are in total control of the network.
Yeah.
They're sort of kept in check by the full nodes. So
Yep.
um would you I'm assuming you would probably argue that you want to have a lot of full nodes to keep it fair rather than just like let's assume there's only like 10 or one full node.
Mhm.
Like how detrimental would that be, do you think?
Yeah, it's like a political process of like if you don't have strong participation in like the democratic process, then you don't get a very robust system, and you don't get a system where many people's views are represented. It's kind of like you just have like I guess a plutocratic or oligop oligopoly.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I think the more people that are running nodes, the more robust of a network you have, and you get into regulation as well of if you only have 10 nodes, then like what is the difference between that and a privately operated system?
Right.
And yeah, I think this is also an argument for users being able to run nodes so that it is actually a distributed decentralized system and not just a permission system that is masquerading for regulatory arbitrage.
Right. Yeah, and they they usually point to proof of work mining pools and say that that's proof of it being or indicative of it being more centralized than proof of
Yeah.
stake, but that doesn't take into account the separation of power and the fact that full nodes keep that
Yeah.
keep them in check basically. So
Yep.
there's a strong argument to make sure that everyone can run a full node for that reason. Um,
Definitely.
but there's also, I guess it goes to what CKB's philosophy is because it's named after a common knowledge base. Uh,
Hmm.
and common knowledge is something that I know and something that you know, but that if it stopped it there, that would be a different type of knowledge. I forget what it's referred to as, but
Hmm.
it doesn't stop there. I also know that I know that you know that I know that you know, and it goes on
Yeah.
infinitely.
Yeah.
So it creates this like it creates this mutual knowledge that everyone knows about and everyone's aware that everyone knows about it. Um, and that forms like a basis for in my research, it was clear that common knowledge was one of like the key require prerequisites um to having cooperation take place in
Mm-hmm.
in game theoretic environments. Um, and I guess why I'm saying this is because um, common knowledge and full nodes sort of have this relationship, or there's this connection between them. Um,
Yeah.
and I guess I'm asking what you think about that in general, like the the relationship between a full node and um, common knowledge, so that
Mm.
everyone is sort of on a level playing field. Nobody has privy information over someone else. Um, and if someone wasn't able to run a full node, they would have to trust another party.
Yeah.
Um, would you say that's not a nuanced enough way to look at it, or is that basically it?
I mean, yeah, you probably chop it down into different ways beyond that. But yeah, I think all that's on point. Yeah, I think about it as like operational knowledge of society. Like the stop sign is always the example that I think of. And I was talking with someone about the different inscription standards, and they were saying that a lot of the like there are discrepancies between how inscriptions are rendered, I guess, or like the semantics of like when you write data to the Bitcoin blockchain, and then it's like looked at offline. You have different indexers that, maybe one, views this piece of information this way, another views it another way. And because it's just off-chain things that people are interpreting, there really is no truth for how that data should be interpreted. But if you encoded that in a smart contract and you said, when you write this data to the Bitcoin blockchain, like it's going to be interpreted this way, like this in this contract, this is exactly how it's going to get interpreted. Everyone knows that. Then you have this shared operational knowledge, and then you can, build on that. And as far as someone accessing I guess needing to go through a full node to get that information, especially if you need that information to transact, then yeah, you're depending on someone else. Like trust, usually when we say trust, we think of like somebody like stealing our money. But I think usually what is more important here is access. Like if you are in Iran or in Venezuela, you can't connect to Ethereum using MetaMask through Infura. Like you're blocked out because there's a private company somewhere that would be running afoul of U.S. sanctions if they allowed you to connect. And it's this like more operational trust, where if you were just connecting to the internet and just going out and getting some packets, like there's not like a person that can be sanctioned for what you're doing. You're just a person on the internet, and it just seems to make a lot more sense, just like a permissionless thing, just like the internet. And I guess going back to like CKB just following Bitcoin and doing things that work, like it's not like we had to reason that in order to prevent somebody from being locked out of the network, you have to do this. It's just more like, no, just do things the way the internet works and just allow people to be first class citizens, and then you just avoid whole classes of problems that other chains might need solutions to.
Yeah, yeah. Letting everyone be a first class citizen is one way to definitely look at it. And yeah, it's trust means a lot more in this in the blockchain space than it does about just having your money stolen or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's about um I guess it's about freedom. Um
Mm-hmm.
having
Yeah,
having a full node is the freedom to not be dependent on something else, on a third
that's
part.
right.
And
Yeah, for access or for information,
yeah, and
for knowledge of truth. Yeah.
yeah, and all of that is like that's really back in like I guess back before 2020, when people actually like cared about this stuff. Before,
Mm-hmm.
like half of the economy, or like 20% of the crypto economy is like using stuff like Solana, where um it's not it's not as prioritized to be permissionless,
Yeah.
and they kind of embrace that. Like I remember we were you guys were talking about that on the town hall for Nervos the other night, about how they, instead of like complaining about the chain being down, they were celebrating that it only took 5 hours to get it back up.
Yeah.
And that's just like a much different standard than what a lot of people originally came in here for. Because I definitely came in because of the freedom and the permissionlessness. So that's definitely something I'm not willing to compromise on. And it was very clear that Nervos wasn't willing to compromise on that either. Um, so yeah. Uh,
Yeah, I think it's just a very different kind of system. That's that's all it is. I like how uh Anatoly started to even talk about their goal being disrupting the duopoly of app stores. Like I think that framing of the goal of Solana, like I think helps a lot for having these kind of discussions, where it's like it's not it doesn't have the goal of being like, global financial infrastructure that like even a nuclear war couldn't take down. And like it's a very different, it's more of like a business kind of play. And I think in terms of like like widely distributed federated system that is, subject to a lot of regulation at the end of the day, I think it probably will work pretty well for a while for different use cases. And maybe something like much more distributed and decentralized, comes along, a long time from now and does that better. But yeah, I mean, to their credit, they are one of the stars of that explosion of innovation that came out of 2017. And like they're still around, and they're continuing with strong momentum. And I can't think of another project from that time. I mean, outside of a CKB, I think we have our own lane that we're doing this in, but I think most of those projects have really struggled to maintain relevance in like this flurry of new things that have come out.
Yeah, it's actually it's actually pretty liberating to not be like a full-blown hardcore maximalist about pretty much any sort of ideal that exists in the space, because like you said, like taking down like the app duopoly is a very like important goal, and
Hmm.
being like a federated um like distributed system isn't the perfect ideal for people who want it to survive like a nuclear war, like you
Yeah,
say, but it's very useful at being like, I guess, semi permissionless, where it's
yeah.
you don't need to, no, someone can't stop you from being a node as long as you can fulfill the node requirements. So there's,
Yeah, you can always validate. I think that's one cool thing. I mean, you may have to spend 5 grand or 10 grand and have a decent
yeah,
internet connection.
yeah,
You're probably gonna have to trust the history from somebody. I think I don't remember how many. I think it might be hundreds of terabytes now. The history of Solana.
yeah,
So somebody would have to ship you some hard drives if you wanted to really run through the entire history of the chain. But you get 99% of the way there, and
yeah,
like at that point, it's like you're in a different ball game. None of this stuff is going to cover everything. Maybe that's one of the learnings of Lightning as well, of like that picture of like this thing can do everything you could ever want it to. Like there's always going to be some limits.
yeah. And it's like there's a much higher barrier to entry when it comes to Solana versus other projects like even Ethereum, for validating and running a full node. Uh,
Yeah,
but it's not a true monopoly either.
yeah.
That's what, that's what we have kind of been dealing with historically, in a lot of cases. Like, um, I guess when I see financial institutions highly regulated and controlled by the government, I see like an artificial like monopoly of sorts being formed.
Mm-hmm.
And Solana definitely is not that. I mean, like I can if I have the terabytes to do it, I can validate myself. I can
I
validate.
think where there, I mean, all this stuff, I think you get into like slippery slopes. So like one challenge that they may have is like if you can get 2/3 of the stake to agree on something, then like that becomes like the path of the network. And if somebody's not on board with that, like it doesn't matter. And like I always pose the question of like in any of this stuff, like decentralized, centralized, whatever, like what if North Korea shows up? Like what if North Korea is like, hey, like we're gonna run a Solana validator now, and then you know somebody goes to the Solana Foundation and says like, hey, you got to fork these guys off. Like you can't have Kim Jong Un raking in millions of dollars in fees every year. Like you got to fork them off. And like if 2/3 of the stake says like we got to fork them off, then they do. And so it's like being able to validate is great, but me personally, like I see the limits very clearly, and I think most people don't really think about these things because it is like a crazy hypothetical, but I think those properties show up like in more mundane ways in the network.
I think it's a pretty valid hypothetical because it could be Kim Jong Un or it could be anyone. Like if
Yeah,
they're,
even Putin, like the number of these like actors is growing every year, it seems like.
yeah, And I that's genuinely scary to me on a philosophical note of trying to politicize or weaponize um these what we want to be as permissionless systems, or like
Hmm.
something decentralized like the internet. Like
Yeah.
it's it's very subjective of like who's good or bad in this
Yep.
world. And trying
Yeah.
to decide who deserves to use the internet is like
Yep.
that's a slippery slope in itself. Because
Yeah.
then
The
who's
the
really the bad guy there?
well, I think, I guess going back to CKB or even Bitcoin, of the protocols don't care. Like TCP/IP doesn't care who's using it. That all those kind of decisions occur at a higher layer. And I think this is, I guess this goes to like the crux of the argument to me about like proof of work versus proof of stake, is like, well, where does your like domain of concern end for the protocol? And with proof of stake, you bring in this concept of identities, in your consensus, and that's not the way that protocols that you like spec out on a sheet. That's not how it works. Like you have a basic protocol, and it's completely agnostic to what's flowing through it. And it just seems like a better way to build things with longevity, because of what you're talking about. Like, inevitably people show up with these requirements trying to do these things, and that's the way the world works. Like, we're not going to stop that. Like you said, who's good or who's bad is all subjective depending on what side you're on, but you can keep all that out of the concern of your low level system.
Right. Yeah. It's it it definitely like I already said, it just worries me because it kind of reminds me of controlling who can, like, it kind of reminds me of, I don't know, speech maybe.
Yeah,
But
it's like the banned books. It's like everything
yeah,
is good until somebody like raises a flag and like, hey, like that's a problem there, go fix it. And then like, okay, we did that, and then like 2 weeks later, hey,
yeah,
that's a problem over there, go fix
yeah,
it. And like, there's no end.
yeah, because there's like someone could ask me a hypothetical, like, do you want do you really want Kim Jong-un to be profiting by off of using the
Yeah,
blockchain? And I'm like,
yeah,
well, no, probably not. But I don't want people to be insulting me on the internet either. But I'm not going to vote to take their speech away.
yeah.
So it's like it could be like anything, like water, electricity. Like would you ban electricity so that they can't be a profitable economy either? Like where
Hmm.
do you stop with that logic?
Well said. Yeah. Yeah, I think it it is a difference in like how seriously are you thinking about these systems? Like, are you thinking about them like, like the electricity wires, or is it more like Facebook? Like how essential is the operation of this system to, the people using it? I think, starting from Bitcoin, and the idea with CKB is to build something that can be like Bitcoin, but do the, cutting edge, exciting things that people want to do looking forward. And that needs to hold that invariant, that this is critical infrastructure. Like, people's lives could rely on this. Like, if this works, like, people's lives could rely on this thing working. And yeah, I think in kind of like the mania of crypto that maybe got lost a little bit, that people were like, oh, I could raise all this money to build this system and sell these coins, and like, you're still talking like you're building economic infrastructure for people's lives, but like, you're not really like being that serious about it. You're more thinking about like, oh, we're going to build an app, or we're going to build this.
Yeah, and I think like I think you and me have always had similarities in how seriously we take the system design, because we often talk about the objectivity of the consensus,
Mm-hmm.
because in proof of work it's a truly objective form of consensus, and that forms a base of like consensus reality that
Yeah.
that can't be messed with essentially, assuming that it's not 51% attacked, but
Mm-hmm.
that's the case. You 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 know for a fact that that this amount of X amount of energy was consumed to create this block, and you can you can basically you can validate the history of
Yeah.
the blockchain without having to consult you know a block explorer uh that runs on the internet.
Yeah.
Which is kind of what Vitalik suggested when he wrote his blog about how I learned to love weak subjectivity. He
Mm,
said he said weak subjectivity is okay because you may not be able to just late spawn into the network and
hmm.
validate everything, but if you have a friend that you really trust, or
Yeah.
yeah, or an ether scan explorer, you can just reference that. And I'm like, why? To me, like definitely understood where he was coming from, but I'm like, I wondered why we were using a blockchain at all, if that's the solution that they're going with.
Yeah, I mean, practically speaking, it makes sense. Um, yeah,
Because it is
I
hard
guess
to
like,
like I'll use like the Holocaust for example. Like there's so much historical evidence that it's hard to deny the Holocaust, but you weren't
sure.
actually there, so there's always this form of
Yes.
doubt. But like in proof of work, the analogy is like you were actually be able to like travel back in time and be at those events, and
Yeah.
and you could do that independently.
Yeah, I I think like thinking about it like reasonably is not the best approach.
Yeah.
Um, because like you're saying with Holocaust denialism, like you're not in the realm of reason, like you're in the realm of uncertainty, and you really don't have anything to hold to, and then you're just having very different discussions with people, and like people are having different discussions with you, they have different questions, and when you have something objective to hold to, then you can at least limit the domain of what you're considering. Yeah, and I think it's I like the word love in there because it almost feels like an emotional attachment to, say, weak subjectivity, where like I don't feel that. Like I don't have love for weak subjectivity. Like I have love for when you're talking about, when we first started talking, I was thinking about how I could probably send you like proof that I sent you a transaction, like in the Zoom messages here. And like if you had like a proper thing to check it, like you would be able to check like the proof of work and the history and like the inclusion in a block, and like there's no way with proof of stake to establish that kind of certainty. And I think 10 years ago Vitalik you know probably thought that these things would be more prioritized and that they would be more feasible than maybe they've been shown to be. And to his credit, he's always been an advocate for these things. He's always tried to push it. And I'm sure a lot of the movement that there is, say in Ethereum too, to have light clients is a product of his advocacy for these things. But it's just a very different foundation. And yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost like he should not have worded the title, the way he did, because like the phrase weak subjectivity, like doesn't it just it's not like the idea in itself is as bad as the name conveys it to me, because
mm,
it's like he's basically talking about having like semi subjectivity. But when you say weak subjectivity, like to
I
someone who,
guess you're in the realm of cryptography, so it's like maybe that double negative is an important thing to be accurate.
yeah, yeah. But it's definitely it's definitely a never-ending conversation, because there's always strengths that can be pointed to proof of stake, like
Yeah.
the lack of excessive energy consumption
Yep.
that make it really really hard to like say really hard to convince 100% of people all the time that we shouldn't be using proof of stake, because there are definitely arguments for it, but um like we're talking about, objectivity has
Hmm.
something very special and profound about it, whereas weak subjectivity, it's more like a band-aid to prevent energy consumption. And
You get finality too. So if you look at something like Cosmos,
Yes, yeah,
that network of all those chains couldn't exist without finality.
right. Um, and we have in proof of work, we basically have economic finality.
Hmm.
Things get like heavy enough, deep enough into the chain where it's like essentially finalized.
Yeah.
Um, but no, there's no like in Bitcoin, there's no true finality. You can always roll back the chain with enough
Yep.
energy. Um, so yeah, but let's see where to go from here.
I think one thing I'll say to proof of stakes credit is that you can bootstrap a chain. So there's thousands of blockchains now which all have utility, and you just couldn't have like a
Right,
thousand different ASICs, and
right.
it just wouldn't work. So it's just such a different kind of system.
Yeah, and I mean like people will disagree with me for sure, but I see proof of stake as a very valid form of layer two blockchains
Hmm.
where they can be tied to proof of work for like um I guess security and objectivity. Uh
Yeah, you could get that. Yeah, I guess so. You said it, security and objectivity. That's it. Yeah.
yeah, and it's like you get the best of both worlds essentially.
Hmm.
But yeah, there was one more comment I wanted to make about objectivity, and it's
Sure.
kind of esoteric, but it is one that I keep coming back to. And it's like, what would happen if we were all living in the metaverse, running on the
Hmm.
blockchain, and history was basically rewritten without people knowing because of
Hmm.
proof of work subjectivity. I mean, sorry, proof of stake subjectivity. And to me, it sort of signifies that objectivity is something that shouldn't be taken for granted. Like knowing what's
Hmm.
real and what isn't is kind of fundamental to what being a human is. Like Descartes
Hmm.
said, like, I think, therefore I am. So
Yeah.
he knew he was real. And being able to extend that to consensus between humans is, I don't even think we've ever been able to do that before.
Yeah, no, Bitcoin is otherworldly in this respect, and it like that was the meme in 2015, which like you said, I really start to show my age sometimes, man. Like it was the trust machine, like that was the meme that like when people started to look at Bitcoin and say, not Bitcoin blockchain, it was this idea of trust. And I guess what we have now is just it's been taken to like a different idea of trust, where like when you were saying like what if the history is rewritten, like it's almost like the history doesn't matter. I think with all these systems, they're synchronous. It's just about like who's operating them now and what do they tell us. And like we're not running nodes ourselves, we're connecting to gateways, block explorers, and like if enough of those people decided to, you don't have to change the history, just change the present. Would people notice? And if they did, what could they do? All that information is bound within the same system. It's I do agree that there is there's something about validation, and like I mean you don't even need to validate all the signatures of the history. Just validate the proof of work of the chain, which any of us can do. That does provide something about some notion of being equals on this planet.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. And objectivity um is a strong like philosophical topic in itself, even outside of blockchain, because
Well said. Yeah.
there's like there's this concept, and it's debated on whether it's even real or not, but there's this concept of objective morality,
Mm,
and whether there's sort of morals like woven into the um essentially like code of the universe, uh,
mm.
because
Interesting.
lots of religious people think that there is an objective morality that comes from God. Uh, and then there's subjective morality and like intersubjective morality, which is where people can make the arguments that like very heinous crimes are not like genuinely evil because it
Mm,
depends on what your perspective of good and evil is.
hmm.
So Objectivity is something that in this scenario that I'm building up here,
Hmm.
objectivity is something that can scale socially to every
Hmm.
person on the planet. Because if you have objectivity, you have consensus on what what is real and what isn't, like we've
Yeah.
just talked about. But
Yeah,
when
it's irrefutable. I think that that's one
yeah,
thing that gets important. There's so many things in our, in our world where it's like it's not so much of like the delta between right and wrong, but just how much time we're going to spend discussing it and like what I don't know. Ultimately, yeah, I don't know. It gets in.
no,
Yeah,
absolutely,
I'm glad you
absolutely.
bring up these things. Yeah.
Yeah, no, like you said, like the delta between right and wrong versus just how long are we going to spend disputing the matter.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that are very, very good at these different conversational constructs to, move things around and like, I don't know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, yeah, that's definitely the case in like politics and stuff that I've
Hmm.
run into where people can spend all day twisting things around. Um
At the end of the day, it's all subjective to what we all agree on and do together. And yeah, I think that's one thing I always liked about Bitcoin is that it's outside of all this realm of people and politics and
mhm,
all that discussion reasoning, because I think if you spend enough time like in it, you realize that it's all just a product of social consensus, and there's diminishing returns to spending your time in that. But with Bitcoin, it's just objectivity. It's anything objective. I guess mathematics or physics be the same thing. It's like it's just that's it, and you can't monkey with it. And yeah, there's something great about that.
yeah, yeah, those two things, objectivity and like we were talking about common knowledge earlier, um they're both very important in having like having a distributed database that can scale to everyone and everything. It,
Hmm.
that there's sort of like there's just a mutual understanding built into it. Um, when it comes to objectivity, there's a mutual understanding of what's true and what's not. And when it comes to common knowledge, there's a mutual understanding of what um, what we all know about the state of the world.
Hmm.
We all know that, like you said, we all know that a stop sign means stop. I know that you know a stop sign means stop, so I don't have to worry about you for the most part running the stop sign and ramming into me.
Hmm.
Um,
Even if I did, you'd know exactly why, maybe like a couple reasons why. You wouldn't get into that. I guess the realm of the Holocaust denialism, where it's like you're just in this world of like endless questions, with nothing to really hold to that you can be certain of. You know that I knew that I either I didn't see it,
yeah,
or I was just angry and I just ran straight through it. You have some domain of possibilities.
yes, yeah, yeah. Um, so I guess I'll come back. I'll bring it all back to Nervos since we're still alluding to common knowledge here. Um, to not go deep into the rabbit hole, I did just want to talk about Nervos at a surface level. Um,
Sure.
nothing in nothing in particular. It can be anything you want to bring up to people. Basically, you were if you wanted to talk about it to someone who wasn't sure what next blockchain to get interested in,
Hmm.
what's the top one or two or three uh, reasons you would give it to be Nervos?
I think like first, I think most people interested in blockchains for the financial side of things. I would talk about owning a piece of the state and ultimately the adoption of the chain. Like you could actually like stake your claim on this thing, like you have like your place in it, and you don't need to. it's not like it's going to cost you a bunch of money to do that. Like you could just throw a few dollars in and like, okay, now you have kind of like your plot where you can, be there and interact in this thing. We don't know where it goes. And I guess that kind of leads into the second part of, if you were to think about like a computer, say 50 years ago, and the you did have like really smart people with long crazy hair that were like super excited about the possibilities, and like most people were like, I don't know, it's kind of weird, maybe there's these video games on the screen, but like, I don't know, I don't get it. And I feel like CKB is very much a similar thing now, where it's like if people like kind of have that abstract thinking, and like they can kind of see the structures that are possible and what might be possible as a result of that, people like myself get really excited about the potential. And yeah, I almost hesitate to start to like lean into what that might be, because I really don't know, and I think when I try to explain it, it always feels like it comes out kind of disappointing. So I think just that idea of like the unknown and potential is, I think, so different from like what we hear from a lot of blockchains. I think most blockchains are like, okay, you can do DeFi, you can do NFTs, and like you can do it 100 times faster and cheaper than over there. And it's like that's it, and like that idea of like certainty, and like this is the thing that you're getting, and like this is why it's awesome, like is just there for the taking, and then they're gonna just tell you, why it's better than the other thing. But like that notion of like possibility or dreaming is kind of left out of it. And with CKB, like that's always been part of what's been there. I mean, I'm glad that we've kind of like gotten over the initial, I guess, bootstrapping the community and like getting people to understand exactly what it is, because I think it opens the door now more to dreaming and experimenting, versus before it was just a lot of like, we have a small number of people that just get this when they look at it. So you just send them the positioning paper, someone like yourself, they'll tear through it, they'll understand it. And like that's such a small fraction of like this industry, that you really do need to take the time to like distill it down, present it visually, make videos, like write articles, do talks, like before you get kind of like a critical mass of people to get it. And I guess maybe that leads into the third part of like the social momentum of the project. Like that, like to me has always blown me away. Like I know when I first learned about, what was happening here and kind of fundamental ideas, like I was excited. And it wasn't something where I was like, oh, like this is going to change the world, like this thing is unstoppable. It was more like, oh, well, like this is really cool, this is interesting, like I want to know more, I want to be involved. And like I see that occur just time and time and time again, and we just like we're scaling exponentially. Like I that's a stretch I'm willing to make at this point. It's like what I'm seeing is exponential growth. And the people who are coming in, regardless of if it's like yourself coming in almost 6 years ago, or somebody who came in 4 years ago, 2 years ago, 6 months ago, yesterday, it's always like the similar kind of thing of like, this is really cool, like more people should know about this, like, and like that momentum, I think, for a project like this late in
Right.
the game, that's significant, that we haven't really seen those possibilities yet. And like we're just continuing to grow socially, and like there's a lot of cool smart people around.
Yeah, I remember when I got into it, like you said, like maybe 6 or 5 years ago. I think it was 2018. But
Mhm,
I remember I've read the white paper and or the RFC 0015 paper, so the
mhm,
crypto economic white paper. Um, and right after I read it, I realized, or like during while reading it, I realized that wow, this is a really great way to like have strong security in a blockchain, to have sustainability, to have scalability, basically all the things that go into the trilemma: security, speed, and decentralization. And it
mhm,
checked all the boxes off. And I'm like, okay, so this is a problem that's plagued the space for so many years now. And I can clearly see how Nervos is like a legitimate solution with balanced incentives too. Um, And so my immediate reaction was that, like you said, like I said, this is really cool. More people need to know about this. And I just went on to the Nervos Reddit and I just found a post that I could comment under. And I basically said, I remember saying, like, this project is so good. Why do more people not know about this?
Yeah.
What
Oh,
can I
a lot
do
of
to
people
help?
say it.
And then I remember Luis messaged me. He just told me to message him. And he's like, yeah, just get involved. And the rest was history. I did a little evangelism, a little bit of writing, a little bit of community building, some memes and stuff. Basically, what I
Hmm.
was capable of at the time was what I tried to contribute. And I always, um, I always loved the people
Hmm.
involved in Nervos. It was always nothing but love. Um, no matter how difficult things became, because we were a diverse community and we accepted like all different walks of life and opinions and stuff like that. So there was friction sometimes. Um, and when you're building a community, that's more than building a business because you want to care about the people who are involved. And it's hard to, like, when it comes to business, you separate your personal life from business.
Yep.
But when it comes to community, it's like your personal life is kind of a part of the story.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
so I feel like there were times of friction throughout the years, certainly, especially if you're like a more um, outgoing and opinionated, strongly opinionated or emotional person. Like, I remember I just remember I was like pretty opinionated about stuff at times or like passionate during an argument.
Hmm.
And it was like it was like my introduction to how to deal with people in the real world when you have like conflicting ideas and perspectives on things
Hmm.
because like I remember when we were talking about this isn't even that long ago, but we were talking about um how to prevent people from monetizing or not monetize, how to prevent people from bribing in the Nervos DAO.
Ah, yeah.
And I remember I thought that, oh, just like outright telling people on the just like outright making it against the rules to offer a bribe in the proposal isn't enough because like double speak exists and like you can talk behind closed doors about stuff.
Yeah,
So
to just drive this activity elsewhere.
yeah, yeah. So I remember I was like I was legitimately getting like frustrated. I'm like, this isn't enough. This isn't gonna stop it
Yeah, no, yeah, I
completely.
have the solution. It has to be this way. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I didn't even have a solution. That was even the worst part. Like
I have the problem.
I was like, I don't know what to do about this, but this isn't good enough. And and then you shared the meme about everyone trying to like there's a boat that everyone's in and there's a hole in the boat and water's coming in and people are talking about what to do. And you compared it to DAO governance because there was a guy
Yeah.
in it that was like I forget I already forget, but there were people who were basically just being like cynical on the boat and they're like, why are you even trying to like, well, it's not gonna work. And
Yeah.
um but yeah, like I said, I fell in love with the project and I always loved the community. And like you said, like people who get in, no matter what time, they're always very, well, they're always very fascinating people. Um,
Yeah, definitely.
I've never, I've never come across like I get like, everyone in the world is special and unique, but like, I've never come across so many unique, like very unique and special people in one space. And that's why I'll always have like so much respect for the people in Nervos, no matter how passionate I was would get at some point at
Mhm.
certain times. And I guess that's to say that Nervos is really good at um, accepting people for who they are so that they can
Mm.
be a global community. Because um, even though we've had we've all had our disagreements in the past, we're still able to work together towards the future. And that's like a very hard thing to break or shut down because we're all in this for way more than the money. We're
Yeah.
we're in this to like create a new world of possibilities, like you say, because Nervos is so flexible and profound that it's more about what isn't possible than what is.
Mm.
Um, we're
Right.
all here for that. Like like I have my um I have my disagreements with some of the leaders in the space, but that's what is important about decentralization. It's not like one person or a group of people that have ultimate say on everything that
Yeah.
happens and who's allowed to be involved because there's more room for other people. Like I talked to Jane recently, and
Mhm.
I'm going to be helping with I guess awareness is the best way to
Mhm.
put it, and it's like networking and stuff like that. Um, and I'm really excited for that because um, I wasn't I wasn't sure what I would be able to contribute if it wasn't in the Nervos Nation.
Sure.
And now I have a better idea of what I can do on my own without depending on the Nervos Nation in as like a gateway to contributing.
Sure. Yeah, I think decentralized things are, like you said, they're you have to have acceptance of people being people like that. I really like the contrast you drew between like a business and a community and just the difference that you're dealing with there. And yeah, I do think that most crypto projects are structured like businesses and they operate like businesses. And with this project, that's never been the case. It was, that was, I think, my hardest years on the project were when we, kind of like buckled up and like, okay, now we launched this network. We got to be serious now. We got to have organization and we got to, hire serious people that, hire the best and like they're going to structure things and, have reporting structures and we're going to have plans and roadmaps and like ultimately not quite, exactly what people wanted. And I think, but at our core, I mean, really is a community. It's always been a community driven effort. And yeah, I think, in like your case of like you are a, hurricane in and of yourself. And it's like that I guess clear delineation between like this is my domain, like this is not is like almost like a better thing because then you just have like complete freedom to be like who you are and to do things and to not worry about stepping on people's toes or like am I wanted here? Is this cool? Am I gonna butt heads with this person? Like decentralized thing, it's like it's just bigger than that. It's just meant to encompass like I guess the full breadth of humanity and like just look at the internet. I guess a good example. Like it's just you can't put it into one box. Bitcoin's the same thing, and yeah, I mean I'm glad your story is I want to use the word inspiring, but it feels cliche. I'm wondering if I can come up with a better word, but it's like encouraging maybe is the right word of like seeing like all of the ups and downs and even like you like liking the project from like the first principles of it and not like not needing all the social signal or kind of like the additional like refinements just taken pure from the ideas just being 100% one on board and everyone goes through their ups and downs like I'm no exception in terms of like feeling at times like what the hell am I doing like is this going to work like why are we doing things this way like I have a problem with this I have a problem with that and like but more often than not it seems like the people who kind of go through all of that like are more committed by the end of it because you've explored, what the alternatives are, and like what else you could be doing with your time, and where else, the people you could be hanging out with, and that sense of like certainty in the commitment like goes a long way. It just like reinforces things like going forward. Yeah, so like from my perspective, like I'm very glad that you're continually engaged and like feeling like more I guess just seeing a pathway for yourself to operate within this like growing like social organism. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, I mean, my plan was to just bootstrap my own um sort of micro community within
Yeah.
Nervos.
Well,
Um,
you started community God knows how long ago that blew up and became another community, and it's like it's just the way these things go. It's
yeah,
evolution. It's like,
it is.
creative destruction, I guess is the right word.
Yeah, yeah. It was, and it was an awesome journey. Like the ups and
Hmm.
downs were
Yeah.
pretty wild, but that's life. And I was like 21 when I got into it. Like I was a kid
Hmm.
basically in this modern world. I was still viewed as a kid, and I was a kid, and
Hmm.
I basically I basically like was maturing on a personal level during the journey of CKB, and
Hmm.
it was it was really eye-opening because there were times where I would think I was in the right, and then
Hmm.
I had to learn the hard way that that wasn't true, and
Hmm.
I fucked up basically.
Hmm.
Whether it was being too rude to someone or not getting along with people or taking something too seriously, um, or just taking a hard line on something I should have been more chill about. But
Yeah.
all these things and at times I had to take like a legitimate step back and ask myself like, who am I? Am I an asshole or
Yeah. How do I define myself?
yeah? And
Yeah.
so it was definitely a long journey, and but I'm glad that I was able to come back time and time again instead of just like completely rage quitting. It was more like taking time off.
Hmm. Yeah,
Um,
which may have been necessary anyway. I think that's one thing about crypto, or maybe just passionate people working on things. It can be consuming, and like, yeah, sometimes just simply like finding more crypto life balance maybe is a word. I was trying to think of a better, maybe passion life balance is a good word.
yeah, yeah,
Um, yeah. I mean, especially like that, I guess like that, like mid to late 20s, getting into 30s kind of like time in life is like you need to like carve out your world, like if you don't do it then you're kind of like you kind of start to get stuck in whatever you're in. Yeah,
yeah,
life slows down, you get more commitments. So
yeah,
like yeah, that like breathing fire kind of approach it's understandable.
yeah. And I mean, like you want to figure out things earlier rather than later because you don't. It's better to not have an identity crisis in your mid 30s,
Hmm.
but you are. It's better to it's better to go through those uphill battles sooner, especially when you're more like malleable mentally and you have space to grow. Um, but yeah, I guess I'll just finish off the thought because I think it's really important um, for people to um, see that you you can make mistakes and it doesn't have to ruin you, you know.
Yeah.
Um, and it's all about the you sort of get what you deserve in life ultimately, like
Hmm.
karma and stuff like that. But I feel like I feel like there was times where I was in like a toxic relationship with certain people.
Hmm.
Um, and who's to blame isn't really the point. It's more
Hmm.
like if I was if I was like pissing someone off,
Mhm,
and I said I'm sorry, and then I come back and do the same thing over and over again that pisses them off. It's like,
mhm,
is this kid really learning his lesson, or is he
mm,
just taking advantage of our kindness? And
yeah,
um, I just out of respect, I won't name names, but there's people who were just like, you know what, I've given Will enough chances. I don't want to deal with him or talk to him anymore. Um,
mhm,
and that was probably the biggest moment where I had to step back and be like, okay, I there's a chance here that I became like the boy who cried wolf or something like that,
mm,
or something where I just kept doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Uh,
mhm,
and it made me, yeah, it made me realize to not take relationships for granted.
yeah. I always prioritize the relationships, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm hoping that I can finally be the person that I think I was meant to be. And I'm glad that there's still people around on my side because um I don't blame the people who are like who got fed up with me. I don't
Mhm,
I don't blame them because it can take an emotional toll to have to deal with a problem over and over again. Uh,
mhm.
and
Yeah, I think everyone has their personal like capacity limits and other, demands and everything. And it's like sometimes it's, there's a lot there.
yeah, but I mean the future is always bright, and I think that
Mm,
us instead of trying to force us all into one circle and working together, um, the openness of Nervos um, allows different social circles to work in parallel
definitely.
and that's what decentralization really is.
100%. Yeah, I think we've always been this way between like the split of the Eastern community and the Western community.
Yeah,
And, with I mean, I remember when there was only an Eastern community and the Western community was just like, well, I guess you remember as well. You're probably one of those people initially where it's like there was only a couple people, Tanner was there too. Um, yeah, and then each thing kind of grows in its own, and we're just kind of watching from like over the fence, what's going on next door. Like we don't really have any real context. We know that something's going on over there. We can kind of get a sense for it, but overall, like those two things really don't mix, much at all. And then that just kind of, I guess, provides a structure that we exist in, where it's like, it is like that.
yeah, there's like there really is no central coordination in Nervos. Like it really is like the case where it's very loosely structured,
Yeah.
and it's one of its strengths. And 6 years later, we're seeing that pay off exponentially. Because, like you said, there's like what you see now is actual exponential growth in Nervos.
Hmm.
And I guess it was hard to see for the first few years because, like an
Definitely.
exponential curve starts off looking flat.
Yeah, for most, what is it, like most of its life, it's like it's imperceptible and
Yeah.
then it just shoots up. Yeah.
And it was imperceptible to most people. Like the people saying when marketing all the time,
Yeah.
they're like, this
Oh,
project is screwed.
yeah, I feel like for me it was like celebrating every like single person that gets added. Like every like committed like person that you're seeing like in those channels and like advocating, and like every one of those people is like a celebration to me. Like, it wasn't looking for the big numbers. It was just more like just each one of these people that comes in, like they are kind of like the growth. Like they are the big jump. Each just one person. And then you get something that socially scales. And I think that's, even though things have been really challenging to take such a long path, I think you do get some robust kind of like social, like something that can be immune to, I guess, hijacking or changing. Like contrast, say, Bitcoin with Ethereum in this respect, that Ethereum socially scaled like relatively fast compared to Bitcoin, where it's like it became like, I guess when did it launch? 2015, and then by 2017 it's like in the news, and like that, that brings in all sorts of people. Or Bitcoin, that imperceptible for probably 4 years, 5 years of its initial growth, and then Bitcoin is very hard to for things to kind of like shift, whereas Ethereum is like every year there's kind of like a new flagpole that they're aiming at. So
Yeah, yeah, no kidding. I mean, for example, they just when they need to and when they want to, they'll change the emission schedule of the supply.
they haven't done it in a while, but yeah, we'll see. um
Because it's been working for a while.
yeah, so far so good. Maybe some people say it's high. I'm wondering about how fees work after they put in EIP 4844, and maybe you see a lot of the transactions right now that are on mainnet move into the blob data. Maybe fees go down, and I guess validators probably wouldn't want more emissions, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's subject to change. And like going back to that thing around like subjectivity and objectivity, just that awareness people have that it has changed in the past, people can change it. Even like the number of times people have come into those Telegram channels saying like, oh, you need to burn more CKB or like emission too much, and like it's like, no, we've all agreed like this is it, it's not going to change, like that's it. It's just a very simple answer for everyone, and you don't get into the governance things and like possible
Yes.
centralization, and it's just really different.
Yeah. Yeah. Two fundamentally different protocols for sure. Um, and I hope that that's what attracts more people to CKB over time. People listening to this, definitely should check it out because it's not it's not like Ethereum in a lot of ways. Um,
Hmm.
and we think most of those ways are for the better. Um, but yeah. So any final remarks about CKB at all? It can be anything from development to principles, or but just anything else that you would add on top of all this. If not, it's okay. Because I know we
Oh,
kind of did.
yeah, we covered a lot. Um, yeah, I think that idea of you can use any programming language. Yeah, I think there's just a lot of flexibility there. I'm seeing that things have to build up from quite a low level, but when you build things right from the bottom, then they work a lot better up top. And yeah, just excited about the possibilities.
Yeah, it has like a an obscene level of flexibility. I mean, I'm not a computer scientist whatsoever, aside from what I learned through crypto. But when I learned about Risk Five, and how much you could do with so little, like the the I don't know what see I don't even know what to call them, but like the the functions or the commands or whatever that you
Instructions probably is
instruction
what
yeah
it's
a
called.
instruction set. It's actually very small. I mean, there's
Hmm.
extensions to it, but the original one's actually very small amount of instructions. But
Hmm.
out of that, you can build like we see in Nervos, you can um, basically add any sorry, not cryptographic primitive
Hmm.
that exists onto the network without forking it. And I mean, that's a level of flexibility that did not exist in Ethereum. Um, they
Yeah, it's still, however many years later, still kind of unheard of, from any chain. I think in the Cosmos ecosystem, they're starting to play with this idea. But you probably have to hard fork the chain or start a new chain to do it.
right.
It's still like incredibly novel idea. I mean, I think it is, it's tough. I mean, I think to even make like CKB work the way it does, that you can just run a node on basically anything. Like I'm sure like a huge amount of engineering has gone into that, and then from a developer's perspective, then they need to consider like what is the cryptography that my users might be using? Is there a different kind of cryptography they might be using? Like, are there different wallets I need to support? Like, it does get complicated. There's a price to pay, but the bet is over time that flexibility is better than not having it,
Right,
for users, and also from like having to change the core system to accommodate what people want to do in the future.
right. And for listeners, what does it mean for um the VM to run on a hardware level? Because that's how it's described in
Hmm.
Nervos.
So for someone running the software, like you're just running a piece of software in your computer, so you're not going to need like some specialized hardware or something like that. But the the translation of what that I guess hardware described in software, like when you translate what that like virtual hardware is trying to do inside your computer, it's very efficient to translate it down to the actual hardware in your computer. So you can contrast it with, say, running other virtual machines for other blockchains. Like you probably won't run a node on your computer. And this is one of the reasons is that it's very it's efficient to translate down that those hardware level instructions that the software is dictating, maybe is the right word.
Mhm.
You translate those down and they run on your actual hardware. It also means that you can support different platforms. So like the newest Apple Macs have different kinds of processors than say older Intels, different chips from like Android phones or um, a Raspberry Pi is another one I'm thinking of. So it's it will be very cross-platform. Like that's the idea with CKB is you want nodes to run everywhere just on anything that somebody has. And making this decision to run the RISC-V hardware instruction set in a software environment makes that more possible. And a stretch idea is in the future we could see actual RISC-V hardware nodes where instead of running a node on your computer in software, you're running it on actual RISC-V hardware, and it's 100x faster or something like that. So the network could scale in that way. It would require everyone to have dedicated hardware, so it's a long way off, but it is a possibility that CKB has that I can't think of another chain that would have that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Was there anything about the hardware level VM that has to do with, and if not, whatever, but is there
Mhm.
anything about it that has to do with security, like running it on the lowest level of computation? Like, does it make it more
Mm,
secure at all?
it probably helps in terms of the tools that are available. Like if you wanted to prove some things about what RISC-V code was doing, you'd probably have a better time with tools than if you were to say try some bespoke Ethereum or MoveVM kind of thing. Um, Overall, I think it's still very, very hard to improve security in this way. Um, yeah, the security in blockchains is there's a lot that needs to be done. Yeah, RISC-V helps in some ways, but it's still a ton of effort. I don't think there's any substitute outside of just like I guess lots of people, like lots of people like writing code, lots of people using that code, lots of people auditing that code, lots of people trying to break the code. Like I think that's how you get to security. So I don't think RISC-V has any monumental advancements here, but I do think it in that situation where you had a lot of people looking at it, I think it is a very different paradigm than some of these other platforms just because of the standardization of it.
Okay. All right. Um, so I think that's everything I wanted to ask about Nervos today because
Mhm.
there's always more to talk about, of course. But it I think we've been on a big decent chunk of time. Did you want to say anything about Ergon?
Yeah, we could talk about Ergon. I mean, that's the name of the channel is Ergon Talk, so we gotta give
Yeah,
him something.
yeah. This is actually the last time I'm gonna do like a Nervos focused pod episode on this
Mhm,
channel. I'm gonna split it into
mhm.
two channels going
Got it.
forward, so I can do Nervos focused stuff without confusing people with the title.
Okay. All right. So first Ergon question is has anyone come into that channel and been more critical of the technical underpinnings of the project than I have been?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. I felt like I hit it pretty hard. Like when you first came around and like okay, I got this paper. I was
Yeah,
like, okay, it's a POW thing. There's 160 people in the Telegram channel. I was like, okay, I'm gonna rip this thing apart. And I feel like yeah, I think really positively. I haven't had great. I guess like my words are being unclear here. The responses to those challenges have been pretty good, and I don't have any sort of like solid like I don't think Ergon will work because of this. And I feel like in crypto most of the time it's like those things get established by now, like when you tire kick it. So credit to Lightshow and yeah, I guess Lightshow and just whoever else has been imagining this. Yeah, it's a pretty good system.
yeah. He's a really brilliant guy because it's like he. It's not like went to school for like security and distributed systems. But when you ask him about the security of Ergon, he actually gives like a pretty comprehensive answer. Like the short TLDR that I sent you, the last thing I sent you in
Yeah.
our DMs, like that was pretty well thought out, as far as I could tell. And he went to university to be a physicist.
Hmm.
So it's just he's a very interesting person. So I feel like if anyone could do it, pull it off, it would be someone like him. And
Hmm.
I guess we're just in the phase of um the unknown because it's easier to like simulate security
Yeah.
but it's harder to see how it plays out in practice, or
Hmm.
it's much more unpredictable. Um like there's so many blockchains that try to improve security and end up making it actually worse because they
Hmm.
introduce new attack vectors, and that's something that Ren talks about at length. He Ren Zhang has done some like excellent research on proof of work security, that I definitely recommend to anyone to check out because it's kind of foundational in my opinion, to proofs about proof of work security. Um, but I guess the unknown is this proportional reward system. Does it is it resilient against attacks? Like if someone was
Hmm.
actually try to attack it, because since the block reward is based on demand, um, if there were no demand for a few blocks, there's no block reward.
Yeah.
So you have a block, you have, or there's very
Yeah.
insignificant.
Users can't transfer. The chain doesn't progress.
Yeah,
Maybe
he,
somebody remines the previous blocks to take. Well, yeah, I mean it's almost like it's adversarial of like if I want to like delete your coins, I can remine from before and like take those transaction fees. I mean it's a BCH system, so like the fees are probably going to be pretty low
mhm.
forever. Um, so like it does seem more like adversarial. Like I would just like have a problem with you. That's why I would remine the blocks. But then at the end of the day, it is about like the demand for those coins. I do like the yeah. I mean that I almost feel like that's just like it reminds me of the Bitcoin 21 million transaction fee security thing of like it is a known issue, but is that enough to kind of like stop it, or will there be like some sort of an answer in time? And then like all you really need is utility, right?
Yeah, yeah, because if there's enough demand to actually move money around, which is its purpose, is to be a medium of exchange.
Mhm.
Those there's enough demand to create new coins, and those new coins create block security. So to me, um, I think the best bet is get demand on the network, and the problem would most likely sort of solve itself. Um,
Mhm.
and you might have some empty blocks with no reward securing it, but then if there's nothing to double spend in the blocks, there's no like really incentive to attack it until the last block that had
Mhm.
transactions in it, which would also have a reward in it though. Um, but it's about I'm still like trying to figure out the relationship between demand of like price demand, like um demands which increases the price because
Mhm.
that's what creates new coins for the block
Mhm.
reward, and the demand for transactions. Like
Mhm.
how tight is that relationship? Because that's what it's going to depend on. Because you need increase in demand to push the price up to create new coins. So
Mhm.
those so it can't just be people buying it on the exchanges forever to or I don't know, but it you do you do need a relationship between transactions happening on the network and demand for new coins, not just existing ones.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that idea around being this I guess like stable price collateral for DeFi seems to be a strong driver. I think for me, that's helped to view it all in a different dimension. When I thought of it as like usually when you learn about a coin, people are gonna buy it because they think it's gonna go up, and then it's like, well, okay, you can't do that. And then it's like, okay, well, why would they buy it? If it's a stable coin, are they gonna purchase things with it? And it's like that there's not that much there. But then when you start to think about it, its value to other protocols, yeah, it seems like it could be a reliable source of demand.
Yeah, well, people are so used to like number go up for being the
Yeah,
reason to buy the coin that when people come into this, they ask how is how is demand going to be created for something if the value doesn't change?
yeah.
Um, that's what Jordan asked me, and my answer was like, um, I didn't I didn't want it to sound like I don't know, like arrogant or whatever, but my
Hmm.
answer was really simple. I'm like, the demand is going to come from it being a medium of exchange, being a store of value, and being a unit of account. Because when it comes to DeFi, you really need all three of those things. Um,
Hmm.
Unit of account for writing contracts for lending and borrowing, because like you don't want to owe someone 5 Bitcoin in a year, because
Hmm.
that 5 Bitcoin might 500x, I'm sorry, 5x in price and
Yeah,
value, and then suddenly you owe them 5x the amount of money you originally owed them. Um,
yeah.
that's that's the whole point of a unit of account, is being a valid unit of account, is that it maintains a pretty stable value through space and time. Where and then medium of exchange, well, that's more about just um, transactions, and store value is more about storing value. But unit of account is a very applicable um, um, use case to DeFi, because of this concept of collateral in DeFi. You need collateral for everything,
Hmm.
and um, people use uh, ETH and BTC as collateral, but it's not very capital efficient in most DeFi applications because it's so volatile, you have to over collateralize to prevent the to prevent it from becoming under collateralized due to volatility. I'll just give an example. Maker, is it Maker? I think Maker.
Die
Die, Maker
over
DAO and
collateralized. Yeah,
Maker
yeah,
DAO and DAI is over. DAI is 150% collateralized, I think.
that's correct. Yeah.
It was last time I checked,
Yep.
but yeah, that's because of its volatility. Now, if it had less inherent volatility, you could make that collateralization much lower, and
Mhm.
you increase the overall efficiency of the economy by a lot. And another example is in lending and borrowing. You have to over collateralize because in Aave, for example, if your collateral falls to 80% of the loan, they will automatically liquidate your collateral to
Mhm.
cover the loss, and you lose, and then you instantly lose all your money.
Mhm.
So that's a forced liquidation. And my thesis is basically that once Ergon, it's kind of a chicken and egg thing, but once Ergon becomes pretty fundamentally stable, you
Mhm.
won't have forced liquidations using it as collateral. And that would, if you can prevent the first liquidation, you can prevent a cascade of liquidations
Yep.
because it is something that happens like a domino effect. And we saw that in the past um, where protocols went into um, sort of catastrophe mode, and governance had to step in to protect the protocols.
Mhm.
So I Licho didn't really think much about DeFi, to be totally honest. Just when he was building it, when he was explaining it, when he was writing about it, he
Yeah.
didn't mention DeFi. Um, that sort of came from me and my experience in DeFi and the pitfalls that I saw between the trade-offs of stable coins and their fragility and their centralization risks, and then the instability of stuff like BTC and ETH, which are
Mhm.
more decentralized and censorship resistant, but more fundamentally volatile. And Ergon to me was like just the best of both worlds, which is why I think it's like a genuine building block for scaling DeFi. Um, we decided to call it scalable liquidity so that
Mhm.
we weren't confusing people with scalability in terms of transaction speed.
Mhm.
But yeah, I think if this works, and I hope it works, it'll definitely be a game changer for DeFi. Um, and then once you make a game changer for DeFi, you make a game changer for a lot of other things as well.
But how do you guys think about economic efficiency? So, like, part of the reason that um, DAI started using USDC for collateral is that you can scale USDC much faster than you can scale ETH, like in terms of like the amount of liquidity you can inject,
Yeah.
because ETH is restricted by issuance. But in this case, we actually have to burn an equivalent amount of value to get value into the system, and once it's there, you could. I guess if you use leverage, you can make more efficient use of it. But I'm just wondering how you guys think about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, so the amount of ETH that you can get for liquidity is restricted to the block reward, but
Hmm.
um our liquidity um ceiling, I guess, is more about the available SHA-256 hash rate.
Hmm.
Like if there was a lot of demand for Ergon, and we saw this when price went, a few couple X's above production cost,
Hmm.
um, suddenly we started swallowing hash rate. It wasn't even a
Hmm.
joke. Like we were ranked 2000 coin, and we came margins within flipping BSV's hash rate, which is
Mhm.
kind of that's just unheard of. That doesn't happen in
Yeah.
work chains. So I think that the liquidity it scales pretty well because we saw that basically the longer price maintained above production cost, the faster um uh supply started growing.
Mhm.
So I think that it scales pretty well, and the only ceiling is really what happens if we happen to swallow all of Bitcoin's hash rate. And Licho did calculations that if we were to have, if all of Bitcoin's existing hash rate were to go into Ergon right now, and that was it, there would be no more hash rate after that, the
Mhm.
supply would be capped at about somewhere around 11 million coins. So there's actually I think that's actually like something that we have to think about, which is like there is a cap, there is like a limit on
Interesting.
supply. It because we'd basically have less coins than Bitcoin does. And that's
How does that work? Like if it's if people keep putting hash rate in, they're producing coins. Like I guess I have trouble seeing like how you reach a limit. I mean, is it just from the doubling because of Moore's law?
no, I mean a limit as in like to get more coins you have to increase the amount of coins. Like you, if you want to be getting more coins than you already are, you need to increase hash rate. And if all of the ASICs in the world were mining the same amount of coins, and there was still more demand for more coins at like a higher rate than was being produced, we would have to wait for more ASICs to be produced, and then that would be the bottleneck for supply. So you kind of
Okay.
I think you just run into like this problem of not having enough ASICs to meet demand. And that's what concerns me the most about supply. But I think at that point we get into fractional reserve.
Mm,
And that's
mm,
like a secondary supply to expand and contract on demand. Um, so it's a little more of a trusted environment, but so is Bitcoin's layer two. Um,
mhm.
so I
In
think
terms of oh, you're still going. Go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say this. I think that's like the answer to getting enough liquidity for DeFi. We will we'll be able to have, let's see, there's a 11, so 11 million. If we got all of Bitcoin's hash rate, we would get to like 11 million coins in that moment, like after all the hash rate converted.
Mhm,
Um and the production cost of each coin. So like the fundamental value of each coin is 2000. So I mean that's still billions of dollars worth of economic bandwidth, but we're
mhm.
probably going to need a lot more than that. Um,
In terms of a DeFi ecosystem, do you think about like building using the Bitcoin Cash primitives, or do you think about more of like a bridged ecosystem?
um, both pretty much.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I want us to be building like stuff natively on Ergon, but um, I think this is the way I put it to Licho. We have two ways of approaching this, and we should
Hmm.
approach it in both ways. One way is bringing DeFi to Ergon, and the other way is bringing Ergon to DeFi. And
Mm,
bringing Ergon to DeFi would be that cross-chain solution of bringing it on the other chains as collateral, so they can use something that's fundamentally stable, not based on a peg, but based on proof of
mhm,
work that they can use as collateral instead of using USDC.
mhm,
No, so like on Nervos there will be DeFi inevitably at some point, like
mhm,
popular DeFi, and I see a future where Ergon can be bridged to Nervos so that they have like a stable, unbreakable collateral that isn't dependent on governance or anything.
Yeah, I think to me that's the most exciting thing about it is just this idea that you could have collateral that wasn't
Yeah.
was stable, but also was trustless and
Yes.
permissionless.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what I like. It's not zero sum. It's not about beating Bitcoin. It's not about beating Ethereum or beating CKB, but it's about giving them a tool to have to make their system more trustless or maintain the trustlessness.
Mhm.
Um, and that's what I want to see for Nervos for sure, is to if it had some trustless collateral, it would just be very interesting for the longevity of certain protocols, um, keeping them alive through um, very tough and stressful conditions, um, especially when there's political pressure and stuff like that around stable coins.
Mhm.
It would be nice to always have this fallback option or an option that appeals to people's um, desire for trustlessness, which is something that a lot of CKB people want.
Definitely. Yeah, I think we haven't quite found the Nervos DeFi move yet, but yeah, something like this I think is in the right line of things where it's like you can kind of verify that bridge from BCH chain.
Yeah. And to be honest, I would like to see Aragon mature a little bit more before it was used for that purpose.
Hmm.
Because if it's not even stable-ish, like let's say like 20% fluctuations are what we can tolerate, and it's having occasional 50% fluctuations. I wouldn't see
Yeah,
I wouldn't see much much demand or need for it at that time. So
got it.
I definitely want to see it mature a little bit on its own first, have a bigger market cap, bigger volume, better liquidity, so it can be um it can be bought and sold without having as big of price impacts. Um, and supply can um, supply can be more reactive, um, so that we don't have like, like if someone injected like $100,000 into the exchanges right now and just bought up Ergon,
Hmm.
it would take a little while for supply to react. So the bigger supply is, the better. Because if we had if market cap was like $10 million, like a hundred $100,000 injection into demand in the markets wouldn't have that big of a price impact. So it just needs to be bigger before it can be really used for its intended purpose. And like I said, that goes back to more of a chicken and egg thing. But
Hmm.
I think what I was able to show by doing a little bit of marketing and campaigning for it was that we can make it we can make it bigger, and um we can overcome that hurdle of how do we create demand for something that has no demand. um
Hmm.
and you have to be able to sell a narrative. um you have to be able to sell the idea to people, uh and yeah, people will buy it and sell it when they're speculating on the price volatility. And when people want when people want Ergons immediately, they'll buy it and they'll push up the price, and that
Hmm.
showed to increase supply. Um, and so now we have a market cap that's like 20 times larger than it was originally, and that just means there's more liquidity available, so market makers can increase their business
Mhm.
and provide more liquidity to reduce price impacts on purchases. Um, so I think we'll just see it working out in that way. Just just marketing it like a medium of exchange, and people will want to buy it as a medium of exchange and a store of value, and to provide liquidity and earn good yield, because liquidity provision, market making yield, um, people are familiar with impermanent loss in
Mhm.
automated market makers. So the expected volatility of an asset actually impacts its liquidity. So something that's more fundamentally stable will actually not only have um, more more liquidity providers, but it'll reduce impermanent loss, because the loss is actually impermanent when it goes back to its equilibrium price. So it's like um, better business because the yields are better. And if you have a yield that's even 1% higher than a competitor's yield, it's going to beat out in the long run. Um, so yeah, it's kind of like a two-headed thing, but it makes it makes for um, better liquidity, more scalable liquidity provision, because the lack of volatility um, means that yields are better. So, and I mean, you see that in DeFi. So
Mhm.
in DeFi, highly volatile assets actually have low yield in borrowing and lending, and it's the
Mhm.
stable coins that have really high yields.
Got it.
So
All
that's
right,
oh,
I
I'm
gotta cut it
sorry.
off here. No, it's all good, man.
I knew I was running on too long, but
No, I just gotta get
but
going. I
yeah,
gotta get to the event.
I,
But this has been great to talk to you about all these things. And yeah, always happy to share all these things about Nervos and learn about what you're doing on Ergon. Yeah, excited to see where you guys take things. Yeah, it's
of
an awesome project.
course, yeah. Okay, have a good rest of your day, and thank you so
You
much.
too. All
Thank you
right,
so
take
much.
care. Well, great to speak with you.
See ya.
All right. Okay.